A New York couple, Joseph and Claudia, 40-ish, is struggling with their marriage in the aftermath of the death of their only child. Child's name is Lily. So Joseph, Claudia, Lily. They're 3 years out from this event, but they're still very much mired in grief, and they're reaching out for different things to fill the hole that the child has left behind. So Claudia, the wife, Joseph, the husband, who's a surgeon, Lily, the child, and beginning with the scene that I'm going to read, Kira, a new scrub nurse at Joseph's hospital. And this scene is told from Joseph's point of view. All right. There was never a question of falling in love. Joseph was never open to that. Not then, not now. He had needed someone to fuck, and that's what he had found. He had a way of talking to Kira without looking at her. Half of him turned someplace else, one eye on the door, as though he had only the time or the patience for his half of the conversation. As far as he had analyzed it, which wasn't much, she was a distraction, a sedative, something to help him through another night, another winter. He'd seduced her easily enough. He was hardly aware he was doing so at all until he found his arm around her back, leading her purposefully into a dark midtown bar. It had surprised him how easy it had been. It had never occurred to him that things like this could happen, could be made to happen, that lives did not have to proceed along bold, predictable lines. She was more than willing, her slim, athletic body catching the rhythm of the jazz, moving slightly under his steady pressure. He could tell right away she liked sex. He could sense it in the way she squirmed in her seat, like a hyperactive child. She was not afraid to look him in the eye. They both knew what they were about to do. He let himself drink enough to allow the rest to happen, his dark eyes wet and alive, the rest of him set off at a pleasant distance, watching with a kind of bemused curiosity as his life unfolded before him. From the start, he could feel the imbalance between them, small surges of panic fanning across her face as she tried to keep up, groping urgently for the right word, the right reaction, the appropriate tilt of earnestness or play. In small fits of discomfiture, she would turn away from the hard edge of his half grin, her freckled hands hopping around the table like small injured birds. His first thought on entering her apartment was that she'd been expecting him. It was like a hotel freshly made up, the rugs neatly vacuumed so that the lines still held in the nap of the carpet. There was something too precious, too coral-colored about it, soporific, as forgettable as a public lobby. It was an apartment a single woman would have, he thought contemptuously, too considered, the result of too much empty time. Framed museum posters hung neatly on the walls, lit up by discrete tracks, with nothing in any of them to quicken the pulse. Like wallpaper, he mused, or fencing. He smiled to himself. On her refrigerator were pictures of someone else's babies. Kira dropped her bag on the hallway table and motioned him into the kitchen. Grab the bottle of wine out of the fridge. I'm just going to get out of my scrubs. To his right was a cramped kitchen, 2 high wooden stools pulled up snugly to a formica-topped island. The sink was empty, rinsed clean, the sponges piled neatly by the splashboard. When he opened the fridge, he saw her 2-liter bottles of Diet Coke and her pre-cooked meals, stacked and labeled in Tupperware containers. The wine glasses he found above the gas range, arranged in precisely staggered rows. A canister of air freshener stood guard by the refrigerator. There's some good cheese in there if you're hungry. She was standing at the doorway to the kitchen now in jeans and a V-neck sweater, smelling more strongly of perfume than before. Joseph was used to seeing her in the OR, just a pair of green and gold eyes over a pink surgical mask, her wild hair all but invisible under the tight grip of her cap. Now it had been brushed so that the curls looked softer, gauzy, and he reached up to touch them with the back of his hand. She giggled nervously, reached across him to the cupboard above the sink. "Let me just find some crackers. I've got some." He took her wrist in his hand and lowered it gently to her side, staring hard into her eyes and shaking his head. "Not hungry," he murmured. He handed her a glass of wine and kissed her hard on the mouth before she had a chance to take a sip. Behind her, he could see through the doorway to her bedroom. The bed was neatly made, with a pink checked coverlet and a small mountain of lace-covered pillows. There would be a teddy bear, he suspected, or an old china doll, a picture of her parents in a frame by the bedside. Kira was new to the hospital. She'd come in a few months before with a fresh crop of scrub nurses relocated from the recent merger. Older than the rest, but only by a few years, 29 or 30 he'd guessed, marrying age. He could tell she was a girl who'd been dumped by men. She was not quite beautiful, but had a gorgeous body, high breasts and thin hips, and she seemed to try just a little too hard. When he spoke, she looked at him earnestly, eyebrows pinched. When she laughed, he could tell she was keenly aware that a laugh was called for. All of her reactions seemed once removed. But when they found their way to the bedroom, she was a stronger version of herself. He could tell that she liked her body, the way she pranced to the bathroom with nothing on, and straddled him with her chest held high, unfazed by the overhead light. She liked being on top, setting the pace, her small, tight breasts staring down at him. Claudia had always shrunk from his stare, folding her arms around her heavy breasts as though they were something to be protected or ashamed of. When they made love at all these days, it was only in the darkest part of night, thick with sleep, when they would stumble upon one another as if by accident, like total strangers. That night, Joseph had let himself be fucked. It was something new for him, allowing a woman to take control. There was relief in it, the giving in, the giving over. It felt effortless, knowing that they shared in the wanting, knowing that in his taking he was not taking away, she was not losing. But when they were through, he pulled her head down against his chest so he would not have to look her in the eyes. And when she spoke to him, he listened with only half an ear, one eye on the door, his attention rooted to the narrative he was carrying on in his own head. Absently, he smoothed Kira's hair with his hand, allowed himself to forget that she was anything other than a warm body next to his, a hand against his chest, a slender knee between his legs. He tried to quiet his racing thoughts by running through tomorrow's cases in his mind. Joseph thought about leaving in an hour or so before he actually did. When the time came, he moved slowly, standing up unsteadily under the burden of what he'd just begun. She watched him carefully. "Early morning?" "Yeah, case at 7. "I'll be in 2. Her voice was sharper now, forced casual, trying to contain itself. "I'm on days all week." She tried to make conversation, but he was not prepared to go there now. He'd taken his eyes with him, staring intently at his belt, his shoes, the mess they'd made around them on the floor. The apartment was overwarm, and he felt a sudden flush of irritation as she followed him with her eyes across the room. It was late. In his mind, he was already lumbering up 7th Avenue, straining under the ballast of the guilt he'd just taken on. If he had intentions at all that night, he didn't share them. He kissed her goodbye at the door, hands balled deep in his pockets, trying his best to avoid her eyes. There were questions there, he knew. Already they hovered around him like silent accusations. Her satin bathrobe slipped off her shoulder, exposing her right breast, and he looked at it sadly for a moment before he turned around and walked away. Joseph stares at his wife across the bed. Her hair is loose. Her fist is screwed up tight beneath her chin. She's been asleep for hours. He leans toward her in the almost dark, reaches out and lifts the covers gently from her back. Her body stirs, then settles with a sigh. He drifts his eyes, the slender waist, the shallow dip before the swelling of her hips. He pulls his face down close and breathes her in, careful not to touch. He is hard. His penis throbs between his legs, beneath the fingers of one hand. With a weak moan, he reaches out, traces the soft, pale swelling of his wife's moonlit breast. Gingerly, he eases out of bed and pulls the blankets back around her neck. Claudia sighs into her pillow, that is all. She's been asleep for hours. It's only Liam now, half awake, ears pulled up, tail brushing limply at the floor. Joseph kneels down, strokes the dog tenderly across his back. He's made a bed of dirty clothes by the door. Joseph pats at the soft pile, and Liam drops his head obediently down onto the nest of his crossed paws. Pushing himself back up to a stand, Joseph snags the waistband of Claudia's panties on the chapped skin of his thumb. He pauses for a minute, dangling the limp twist of nylon back and forth between his fingers. Bringing it close up to his face, he draws a breath. With the other hand, he reaches for the phone and slips quietly out into the hall. Carefully, Joseph pulls the door closed behind him, just shy of the latch. He looks left toward the bathroom, then turns the other way, to Lily's room. The door's already cracked. He pushes with his shoulder until it catches on the rug, then sidles in and slides it closed behind him. The room is cold. He shudders, suddenly, violently. From the closet, he grabs a cotton quilt and carries it over to the little trundle bed, crawls deeply under the covers. Settling his cheek onto the cool slip of his wife's panties, he pulls the phone in next to his ear and dials. He knows the number by feel. He has done this before in the dark, in the middle of the night. Slowly, carefully, his fingers work their way along the buttons, pausing once or twice to redirect their course. He closes his eyes, draws the yeasty, salty scent of his wife deep into his lungs, waits for Kira to pick up the phone. Hello? Her voice is hoarse and far away. His lips press up against the phone. For a moment, he does not speak. What are you wearing? He whispers. Joseph. Just a moan, sleep thick and swollen. He waits for her to go on, pulls his leg up close to his chest, folds his penis into his right hand. What time is it? She yawns. It's nearly a complaint, but not quite. He strokes himself slowly, feels the sudden lurch and straining of his cock against his hand. You're not wearing panties, are you? There's a purring in her voice now next to the sleep. He groans, his fingers contract, ride roughly up over the tip of his penis and squeeze hard until it drips onto his hand. That's what I thought. I couldn't sleep. I needed to hear your voice. His eyes are closed. His hand lies flat against his belly, sliding the wet up and down against his skin. Just talk to me. Just tell me something. Tell me anything. I was just dreaming, Joseph. It was a good dream. Her voice is soft and thick with sleep. Tell me about the dream, babe. I want to hear about the dream. I don't remember, Joseph. Where are your hands? He hears her sigh. He hears the stretching of her body and her voice. I'm touching myself, Joseph. He moans suddenly, heavily, draws his penis back into his fist and pushes through and back again. Oh, baby, I'm touching myself. Oh, he groans, feels himself falling, sliding, disappearing deeply now into the dark. His spine has gone rigid. His left hand shakes and clenches at the phone beside his head. I'm pretending it's you, Joseph. It is dark now. He has lost himself inside the blackness. His eyes are closed. His right hand works itself against the throbbing of his blood. He gasps for air, breathes in the briny fullness of his wife's stark scent. Abruptly, he lets out the thin tip of a cry, holds it in his throat for as long as he is able, and then the darkness crashes and explodes around him. His body lurches. The phone falls from his left hand off the far side of the bed. Oh, baby. Oh, Claudia, sweet, sweet baby.